If you had to be an adult as a kid, you were emotionally neglected, full stop. You were put in that role that stole your childhood, and now you're still paying for it. You think you're just bad at relaxing? You think you're too independent? No, you're stuck in survival mode. You learned to act fine when you were anything but fine, and now you don't know how to stop. And this is why you can't ask for help. This is why you overfunction in every relationship. This is why you collapse in private, but keep smiling in public. It's not your personality and it's not your fault, but it is trauma, and you are still carrying it. If you had to be the adult as a kid, there's a good chance no one ever told you how wrong that was. You may not even see it as abuse or neglect. But when a child has to take the emotional or physical responsibilities of the parent, something fundamental is taken from them. Their right to be vulnerable, their right to be protected, to receive love without having to earn it. And that role reversal is called parentification. And it distorts your sense of self. It forces you to function and keep upping the ante and getting better at it while your own development needs go unmet. So when I was a kid, my parents got divorced when I was 7. My whole young childhood was them fighting. They fought so much, and my mom would leave sometimes. We didn't know if she'd come back. And then one day, my dad came to me in the hallway, and he had his briefcase and a suitcase, and he said, "I'm really sorry, I have to go right now. I'm going to be seeing you as much as I can, but I can't live here anymore." And I remember that feeling very well. I was devastated. And I really took it on. I felt terrible for him. I used to have this... I'd go see him at his little apartment. He lived in a garage, I don't know. He only lived for another 7, 8 years. And I don't know, he was unemployed a lot. I think it tore him apart that my mom left. But then she left, she remarried, and she moved us out of state. And he didn't sign up for any of that. He didn't want to be divorced. He didn't want to lose custody of the kids. And he was heartbroken. And I was heartbroken too, but I was a lot more in touch with how heartbroken he was, and I got very busy trying to protect him from how bad it was. So my mom remarried pretty quickly, and my stepdad was a good guy, but they required right away, as soon as they got married, that we come up with like a dad type name for him. And so the name I picked was Father. And I picked it because it was formal. I wanted to honor this request that they wanted me to call him something. And it's true, from that age, when I think I was 8 when they moved in together and 9 when they got married. And, he did do a lot for me, but he never really accepted me as a child. We were pretty young. I was that young. I had a sister who was only 3 when this happened. So when we moved away, we got taken away from the dad who loved us, and we were with the dad who was maybe kind of ambivalent about us, the stepdad. But we called him Father, and he did sacrifice a lot to provide for the family. I'm not trying to knock him 100%, but it was a painful situation for us kids. So we had to call him that. Then we'd go visit our real dad, my sister and me. We'd go visit him, and I was so careful always to call my stepdad by his first name and not admit that we were calling him Father, because I knew my dad would be upset. I knew he would. He was emotionally volatile, and he loved us so much, but he didn't know how to keep boundaries around us at all. And so I was so worried about him all the time. And my sister was so little, I told her, "Don't ever say Father in front of Daddy. Don't do that." But she was so little, she couldn't remember. And she kept calling him Father. And I would go to great lengths to go I'd pretend well, how could you say that? We don't call him that. Or I'd try to drown out the noise or distract my dad or anything, because I was so terrified of how he was going to take that. When I look back at that now as not just an adult, but a mother, just oh gosh, for a little girl to be trying to manage all that, to take care of a 47-year-old man or whatever he was. And then I didn't dare tell him about some of the danger that we were in with my mom and stepdad in this new home, in this new state. So my mother would drink a lot. My stepdad would get very angry. And one of the ways he acted out when he was angry, and I can talk about this now that he's passed, is he would drive incredibly dangerously, almost like he wanted us all to die. And twice I had to jump out of a moving car that he was driving recklessly, on a dirt road on a mountain ledge. I had to jump out, and get my little sister and take her out with me and get us both out of a moving car. I twice did that. Once when I was maybe 10 and once when I was 12. I did that. And that's another thing. I look back as a mother of kids. They're grown now. But I mean, I'm very, very in touch with how extreme it would be that kids would have to jump out of the car. And I just can't even believe it. It was never talked about in my family, but talk about parentification, to try to keep a kid safe from, well, functionally, this was abusive behavior. It was an abusive parent. But just to take that on. And also then to never talk about it to the parents. That is way too much for a little kid to hold in. And later in my life, in the very slow unpacking of the trauma that happens, and through my daily practice day after day, and being mystified by some of my own behaviors and blind spots and things, all these little details start to come out where, I used to think of it as like, that was hard. But then I was like, that was insane. How, what did that do to me? What did that cost my spirit to have to save a little toddler out of a moving car a couple of times and not say anything about it, not mention it to the parents who did it to me, and not say it to the parent who was so worried and would have arranged to have me taken away to go live with him, which probably would have been for the best, but he didn't have a job, and I think in those days the courts wouldn't let him have us. So I've had to retroactively go back and just realize I was parentified. And it's given me like all the classic traits of the parentified child, the oldest daughter, and where it's been very hard for me to learn how to relax, how to just trust that other people can deal with their share of responsibility and money earning, and I'll be all right. But the weird thing is, you can't always assume that, because when you grew up this way and it shapes who you get into a relationship with. So most of my life, I wasn't in a position at all where I could take time off and rest. I had to work all the time, starting when I was like 9, and I could never rest. And now I probably could slow down, but you know why I don't? Because now finally at last I love my work. I just love my work. So I do it for love. And so that's good, because it has a way of keeping the bills paid too. And then all the problems come up together and there's no more problem anymore in that area. I'm sure if you were neglected, you could tell stories about amazing things that you did as a child too, that were heroic, that were so brilliant and accomplished. And they may be like favorite family stories. You can't believe what Sharon does, when she was just a kid, she went out and earned $100,000 or whatever. All right, I'm exaggerating, but some kids have done it. But when grown-ups are just like, you were so grown up. What a little lady you were. How strong. You didn't become strong because you wanted to be strong. You became strong because you had no choice. It was to survive. And you learned early that no one was coming. And you learned to suppress your needs. So you become the peacekeeper, the fixer, the invisible one, and you were praised for being mature, right? You're called an old soul. What is that? But what you really were was a child who never got to be a child. And now as an adult, you carry the weight of that role in your body, your relationships, your nervous system. That it's all there. And you may be outwardly successful and still have no idea what your real needs are. You may attract people who lean on you emotionally while secretly you resent how alone you feel. You may be terrified of being vulnerable, of being seen as weak, of needing too much, because back then needing anything came with a price. Maybe your parent confided in you about their marriage or their drinking or their depression or their finances or their sex life. That happened to me. Maybe they leaned on you emotionally when you should have been the one receiving care. Maybe you raised your siblings, or you managed the household, or you took on the unspoken role of therapist, peacemaker, translator. That's a real thing. If your parents don't speak the local language, a lot of kids are, they have to go into the doctor visit and translate and explain, what's going on with mom's uterus or whatnot. And if you did these jobs well, it became your identity. It became, what you are known for. And maybe that still is true for you. But here's the truth that breaks the whole spell. Being functional isn't the same thing as being okay. And being needed isn't the same thing as being loved. And being strong does not mean that you have everything you need. The legacy of being the adult too soon is that you learn to perform your worth. It's like a performance. You learn to read people's moods before they spoke. You learn to anticipate their needs and then smooth over the tension before it erupted. You learn to manage everything except your own feelings. You might pride yourself on how self-reliant you are, but deep down, there's a part of you that's stuck in the belief that if you stop holding everything together, everything will fall apart. And that part of you is still trying to survive. Because you didn't just grow up too fast. You skipped entire developmental stages. You never got to learn interdependence and trust or boundaries in a healthy way. You never had consistent support that allowed you to develop your emotional muscles gradually with safety. And instead, you were thrown into emotional adulthood with no guidance, no protection, and no way out. And here's the cost of that: hypervigilance, anxiety, shame, perfectionism, emotional disconnection. You're great in a crisis, but you can't feel joy. You can handle chaos, but intimacy is filled with fear. You can fix other people's problems, but you don't know how to rest, how to receive, how to ask for anything without guilt. People think you're fine. They say you're strong. Oh, she's a strong woman. You know what that really means, right? But they don't see what it costs you to be strong and fine all the time. They don't see that behind your competence is a child who never got to be seen, never got to be cared for, never had other people help you carry the weight of the heaviness and hard times in life. The childhood is over, but the wound is still there. And when you've spent your life holding all that together, falling apart feels like you could die. Falling apart feels impossible to face. Even healing feels dangerous, because healing feels like you're going to have to become someone you're not, who you have no idea how to be, or you'd already be that person by now, right? It feels like if you ever let yourself be as sad as you know on some level that you really are deep inside, and you don't fight it with a lot of striving and handling things and being fine, that sadness would just drown you. It would just take you down. That's the fear. You may have parts of yourself that you barely know, tenderness that you think would gross people out and push them away if they knew, right? Dreams that you buried because you think they're stupid, emotions you don't even recognize until they come out as like panic or rage or dissociation. They're amplified now. That's not weakness. That's the backlog of thoughts and feelings that your brain couldn't process fast enough. Trauma does that to you. You get jammed up and it's like one of those TV shows about an emergency room in there. The Pit. I love that show, but gosh, it just never stops being high drama, life and death. That's what my brain used to be like. So you may not have grown up with protection or consistency, but you do have choices now. Not perfect ones, never perfect, not magical, but real choices moment by moment. You can shift out of your old roles. You can notice when you're over-functioning. You can catch yourself managing other people's reactions instead of your own. And you can feel the pressure coming at you to say yes and still say no. Not because you're trying to become a different person, but because you're becoming honest. You're becoming yourself. So you start to choose. You rest before you collapse. You say no before you hit resentment. You let someone in, even when every cell in your body wants to run, because you know you have boundaries. You can let them in. Now, it's not easy. It's deeply uncomfortable at first, but it's how you come home to yourself. You don't have to keep carrying it all. You don't have to keep proving your worth. You don't have to keep performing adulthood from a place of childhood survival. This is not the role, you are not the role that you were forced into, and you're not the job that you did to survive. You're not a parent to the world. Actually, sometimes I feel like I am, but I'm not. You're a capable adult now. And with that power comes the responsibility to break the old trance, to let that little engine that is always in overdrive, I think I can, I know I have to, and just let that engine rest for a while. You can keep the engine, but let it rest. You've got the train up the mountain. You've held the line. You've done the impossible. Now you get to be real. Hey, if you liked that video, I've got one I know you're gonna love. It's right here, and I will see you over there. And you might tell yourself that this is actually empowering to have that control over your time, even though you're kind of being controlled by your triggers. But in the moment, it feels good to have that breathing space, just to get people back out of you, just leave you alone.